We'd like to welcome you to another class. This afternoon we're going to be studying from the book of Revelation. Here in just a few minutes we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 3 at one of the seven churches that John wrote to. Of course, Jesus actually wrote to there in Asia Minor. Before we do that, let me just begin by saying, wow, Sunday was awesome. That was a great day. It was just great to get the chance to see some people once again. A couple of things about Sunday that really just made an impression upon me. One is just, wow, we need to be back together. And so it was a strange day in some respects, and the difference in timing and all the constraints and how we had to handle our schedule and everything. But overall, it was just such a great blessing and joy to be able to see you and to hear about things that are going on in your life and in lives of others. And so thanks so much if you were able to attend or watch on live stream. I was also mindful, of course, of those that were not able to join us. I know that some have health reasons, and some are needing to be careful and not be out in that public venue, and that's fully understandable. And so just want you to know that we miss you and look forward to the day that we can all worship together again. And I was also mindful of those that have recently passed away and were not able to be at worship. And I know this is a struggle for those folks, and I was thinking about Dean Graham and just some folks like that worship can be a very difficult time. And so both the sweetness of worship and getting a chance to do that once again with brothers and sisters, but also that bitterness that comes from loved ones and friends and family members that we're not able to see at this time. And so it was a great joy to have our granddaughter, of course, Aspen, there at the 8:30 service with us, along with Brittany. But again, Frazier is working on training up in Virginia and can't be here with us. And so there's that bittersweet kind of moment. And that's the way life is. And so, again, we are going to work hard on making our worship services as encourageable, just an encouragement for you, and making it a blessing for you. And so we'll hopefully be able to have worship begin this. Well, we will have worship begin this Sunday, and once again we will try to make it the best we can. And so we'd like to invite you once again to the 8:30, the 10 o'clock, or the 11:30 services, and 1 o'clock, of course, for the Spanish service, and then the children's home service that's taking place for those that are involved with the children's home. And so with that, we're going to take a moment here and study from the book of Revelation. It's an interesting question, and having been a minister for my adult life and always thinking about church growth and evangelism and looking at churches, and having attended at the time in the 70s the largest church in the Brotherhood, and going through all the changes and just the things that super large church of more than 3,000 members at the time did, and what they worked on, and then also being in the very smallest congregations, where actually on a Sunday, Sheila and I were the only two people in a city of 4 million, 5 million, and we're the only two Christians that are even meeting on that Sunday morning, and then every size in between. And so with all of that, the question often has come to my mind, what is a church like? Like, what does God prefer in a church, in a congregation, in the local congregation? I start thinking, what does he think is a success? What does he think of as, wow, that's a church that I could send my son, Jesus Christ, to if he was living on this earth? It's like, what would it look like? What is pleasing to Jesus? What is pleasing to God? How do we know the Spirit is active and working in that congregation? And so it's always been a question, because I fear, as Americans in particular, we have a very definite slant on how to answer those kind of questions. You know, if you have a football team and they're in the National Football League, and let's say they're like the Dallas Cowboys, and so you go to Dallas, right? And you go to Dallas Fort Worth area, and you look at their stadium, and it's this huge stadium, and you can tell no expense was spared, and it seats many, many thousands of people. So you think, okay, that's how America measures success. Large audiences, flowing coffee on a Sunday morning worship service, free to all, with abundance of wealth that can be seen, a preacher who obviously is successful and looks the right part and has the gold watch, and he's a successful kind of guy, and audience members who come from the most successful parts of life and all the best education, and we think maybe that's what God really desires. Is that God what desires? Does God look at that and go, that's it? That's the place? Or then we start thinking spiritual, and we're thinking, well, maybe it's the church that's like sent out 50 missionaries. The church that's like started up all kinds of programs and is like sharing the gospel with so many. And so you can't help it. If we're American, or if we're thinking like an Asian, or whatever culture or background we're from, and it kind of taints, or like it defines what we consider to be a successful operation. And so I just start thinking, does God like rural churches or mega churches? Does he like house churches or city churches? Multi-site churches or brand new churches? Independent churches? Old churches? What does God really desire? Or maybe another way to say it is, does he like large buildings or storefronts, apartments or shanties, or big giant cathedrals? You know, what is it that's ultimately pleasing to God? And so, you know, we could take that to the extreme, of course. We could start talking about preachers, elders, deacons, the general members in the congregation. Like, what kind of preacher does he desire? A tall one, a short one, a fat one, a skinny one, a really gifted, dynamic speaker, a wonderful teacher, a knowledgeable person, a person who can really relate to people well, and can do all the things that, you know, all of us can probably define what we consider to be the ideal preacher, right? For some, it's we want him to, know the Bible backwards and forwards. And another person say, well, I want him to be a really gifted song leader. And another one may say, well, I want him to be able to visit me when I'm sick. And another one may say, and on the list goes. And so as we think about all those kind of questions, it's really nice because we are not left to wonder about all of these questions. That's the beauty of God's Word, is that the answers are found right in His Word, and that is my job as the preacher, is to pull out the very relevant Scripture and help you see that it actually is very relevant to today. And so, fortunately, we have Revelation to help us with this question. What does God consider to be a very successful place? A very successful congregation. And so Revelation chapter 2 and 3, it's the letters to the 7 churches. And in these letters to the 7 churches, as you know, there's 7 letters, and out of those 7, 5 are given some type of words of condemnation, and only 2 receive no words of condemnation. And so we're going to zone in on one of those 2 churches. It was Smyrna and Philadelphia. But I would like for us to go to Revelation chapter 3, starting in verse 7. And we're going to work our way 7 through 13. And here's the letter by the angel of the church in Philadelphia. And here is what is written. And so this is to the church in Philadelphia. Remember, these churches are all in Asia Minor. They're all in that area of what we call modern-day Turkey. They are various sizes. They were established at various times in the first century. And what's interesting is, of the 7, Philadelphia, which is which is the church that has no words of condemnation, and yet face both it and Smyrna, the two that have no condemnation. Both are facing direct opposition in their locations. And of the two now, Philadelphia is the youngest and the smallest in number of all the congregations. So I find that interesting, that Jesus is going to have no words of condemnation to the youngest and the smallest congregation of the seven. And so here's a church that Christ heartily approved of, and I want to know why. Because I want to imitate that, because I want to get that same kind of commendation. And so what is it about this congregation that made Christ so pleased? I guess is the best way to say it. And so we'll just make our little list here, look at the text, and go from there. And so it starts in chapter 3 of Revelation, verse 7. So he says, "To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, here's what you write. He who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens, here is what he has to say." And so I'd like to start with that point. Point number one, I guess you'd say in our list here of points, is Christ always opens the doors of opportunity. And so that's the way it works. Christ is the one who opens up the doors of opportunity, not us. It's not our job to find opportunities. That's what Christ is supposed to do. He opens up doors of opportunities. Our job is to walk through them. And so as we get going on this church, we already know this is a church that is taking advantage of its opportunities. We don't know what the future will hold, but it's God's job to open up the doors, and it's our job to walk through them. And so we, of course, cannot see the future. We don't know what the future holds. If we knew what the future held, we probably wouldn't want it, right? And so I love the illustration of the door, because if you go to one of those old-timey doors and has the old-timey locks, you can see through the keyhole. And so you know how it is. You get to the door and you look through the keyhole, and what can you see? Very little. It's like hidden. Most things in the room are hidden, and you only have a particular view, and it's very slanted. It's only a little sliver. And I think that's the way life is, isn't it? When we try to peer through the door and see what's on the other side, the opportunity, we want to know all the answers. How much is it going to cost? What is it going to take? What kind of effort will we need to make? What will be our success? And how will God bless us? And what will it all look like? And what does He want us to do over there? And we have all these questions, but we're seeing through a little sliver, little keyhole. And God expects us to walk through the door without all that information, because He's in charge. He's the one that opened it up in the first place. And so I like how he starts this, that it's He who opens up the doors and it's He who shuts them. So with that in mind, he says, well, let me just say something about you guys. He says to this church, I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door which no one can shut. Now I realize you are weak, because you have a little power and have kept my word and have not denied my name. It's so beautiful. I love this concept, because I think this is the heart of this church. He says to this church, I honor faith, not strength. So he looks at this church and says, I get it. You guys have little strength. You're not very strong. You have very little power. You have just a little bit of power. But you have great faith. You've kept my word. You've not denied my name. So they were not strong, but they had great faith. And that's the secret of a successful church. A successful church is not based on strength. It's based on faith. So what is it that God honors? Faith. What is it He's looking for in a church? Faith. What does He reward? Faith. What does He consider to be an exemplary church? A faithful church. And so all of us, as Longmont Church of Christ, can attain that. we can be a people of faith. We may not be the strongest church, the largest church, the best church, the on and on the list goes, all those different things we could possibly list about a church. But if we're a faithful church, we're God's kind of church. And so that's something important to think about, that's what God's looking out for. What we see in congregations is probably very different than the way God sees all the congregations of the world. We look and go, ooh, that must be a very successful church in God's eyes. And God's like, that's a faithless church. They may be strong, but they don't have much faith. That's my kind of church. And he's looking over here at this church full of faith. And so it's just a big encouragement for us. We need to be a church with simple faith. Why am I calling it simple faith? Because he says two things about him. He says, this is all you've done. You've kept my word. You never deny my name. You keep my word. You never deny my name. Okay, I can attain that. That's a goal. That's the kind of faith I need to have. That simple kind of, I'm going to keep God's word. I'm never going to deny his name. All right. So that's it. I mean, that is the success of this church. The most successful church of the 7 churches, the smallest in number, a very weak church, and yet he says, you are at the pinnacle of the churches. When we talk about the pinnacle of church in the first century, Jesus says, yep, Philadelphia, that's it, because they are a faithful church. And so, what kind of church do we need to be? We need to be a faithful church. And so, as we think about all the things we're doing and how we serve others and how we desire more people to hear the gospel and more people to be saved and how we desire growth within our church family, what should be our ultimate goal? I think our ultimate goal is to be like Philadelphia, to be a church that's faithful. We may be weak, but we're faithful. And that's what's important. Well, what else does he say here? In verse 9 he says, behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them to come, bow down at your feet, and to know that I loved you. Powerful verse. We will be vindicated. If we stay faithful, we will be vindicated. Nobody in the world may even recognize or know that we are part of God's faithful. Other churches may not know about us. It's okay. Because in the end, we will see the day when God's enemies will bow before Jesus Christ and confess him as Lord. He says that day will occur. For churches that are faithful, you will see this day when you will see the enemies of the church bow before Jesus and say, yep, he really is Lord. I missed it back on earth. What else does he say? Verse 10. He'll say, we'll be protected. He protects us. He protects his faithful ones. Verse 10. Because you've kept the word of my perseverance, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world to test those who dwell upon the earth. He says, if you're faithful, I don't have to have you go through this. Because testing is to build up our faith. Testing is to help us gain faith. But he's like, you have faith. No need for you to go through it. So God's like, he's just so easily saying, he's like, all these churches over here, they're not very faithful. So I'm going to have to test them so that I can build up their faith. But you guys are faithful, so you're good to go. And if you're faithful, I don't need to send you through this process. And you will be protected. And so just something to keep in mind, that if we're God's kind of church, if we're a faithful church, regardless of our size, regardless of all the different things man thinks make up a success, if we're faithful, God will protect us, no matter what the enemy looks like. Verse 11, he says to us, I'm coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, in order that no one may take your crown. And so he says, consider our obligation. He says, here's what you need to keep doing. After thinking about, you need to remain faithful, he says, wait for me to return. I'm coming quickly, so hold fast to it. I'm about to come, so stay faithful. Don't give it up. And then he goes on to say in 12 and 13, he who overcomes, so that's a part of it, overcome by faith. When we hear about whatever's going on in the world, whatever's taking place around us, in our neighborhoods or in our city or in our lives or in our companies or whatever it is where we're at, the way we overcome is we remain faithful to God. And so, again, very simple. My job is to be faithful. The congregation's job is to be faithful. And so that's our task. And that's how God measures success. He looks and goes, is that a faithful church or not? Do they believe in me? Do they keep my name? Do they not deny me? They're a faithful church. And the truth is, there's always reasons, right? I mean, verse 12 there, he who overcomes, there is always a reason for us to give up. Always. There's always plenty of excuses. There's always reasons to quit if we want to find them. I just made a little list here. There's temptations galore. There's frustrations on every hand. There are people who disagree. We have difficult situations, unexpected setbacks, angry critics, internal discouragement. You may be faced with chronic pain, friends who aren't very friendly, personal failures that each of us battle with that nobody else knows about, that temptation of sin. So the list goes on and on and on why we could not be faithful, on how we could be unsuccessful as a church. But God says, all those things don't matter if you are choosing to overcome. And notice the promise. It's twofold. 12 and 13. He says, if you will overcome by faith, if you'll live faithful lives, I'll reward you with two things. I will make you a pillar in the temple of God, and he will not go out from it anymore. So he says, number one, I will make you a pillar of the temple. That's safety and security. It's like, how rooted and grounded in safety and security will we be? We are the pillar of the very temple itself. We're like the column stone foundation that holds up the temple. We are safe and secure if we overcome by faith. And secondly, he says, we will be named and claimed by God. He says, I will write upon him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. So he says to us, if you'll stay faithful, because the power to name is the power of ownership, we will be given the name of the new Jerusalem. And so it's pretty strong words, actually. He's saying to this church in Philadelphia, you may not be the biggest church, matter of fact, you're the smallest church. You may not be the strongest church, matter of fact, you're pretty weak. And you may not be the best building or the most people or the best speaker or the most whatever. But here's what you guys are. You live by faith. And because of that, I'm going to keep you safe and secure, and I'm going to give you my name. And you belong to me. Powerful words for a church. The other churches didn't quite hear those kind of words. And so, what a great story for us. That when God looks out across the earth, he's looking for some people who are faithful. So how's your faith? Do you trust him? Do you have that simple kind of faith that we just talked about? A faith where you keep God's word and you never deny the name of Jesus. It's important, how we talk to other people and how we interact with others, that we somehow are not fake, that somehow we don't let them think that we are not who we are, which is a faithful member of God's church. And so we want to make sure that no matter what our size is and no matter what we're doing as a congregation, that we remain faithful. A writer wrote this about this church in Philadelphia. He said, let me tell you about this church. It was small. Well, let me just read his words exactly. Small may be our strength in these last days. The tide of error and sin and worldliness may be running very strong. It may not be easy to confess Christ or to hold fast His truth, but His grace is sufficient for us, and woe be to us if we give way to the errors of the age, or conform to its vanities, or seek to please its multitudes, either under the dread of public opinion, or the fear of not being reputed men of progress, or the shrinking from more direct persecution and hatred. Faithfulness to Christ and to His truth is everything, especially in days when iniquity shall abound and the love of many shall wax cold. Fear not, the reward is glorious. The honor is beyond all earthly honors. The contempt and enmity are but for a day. The dignity and the blessedness are forever and ever. You know, I was sitting here right before I started, and Michael's behind the camera right now, Michael Ritter. And he was just talking about, of all things, banana bread. And so I said to Michael, well, why do you like banana bread? I mean, I like banana bread, and I'm sure you do too, but I just asked Michael, why do you like banana bread? And he said, well, you know, it's funny, but banana bread's interesting because it's so good, and I really like it, but it's something that you can take bad bananas and turn those bad bananas into something really good. Like you get really black bananas and like, ooh, I don't want to eat them anymore, and they get kind of mushy, but they're perfect for banana bread. And they go right in there, and you turn something that you maybe don't want to eat anymore into something that you will eat. And it's quite tasty, banana bread. And so I think, wow, you know, I wonder how many of the other 7 churches, the big, strong, powerful ones, that had all kinds of work going on, I wonder how many of them looked at little Philadelphia and said, oh, look at that little nobody church. And thought, you know, what good really are they? They're never going to really make their mark. They're really never going to do much. Well, at least they try. And yet, how different God viewed Philadelphia. How God saw them in such a different, more powerful way through their hearts and through their faithfulness. So that God would say about these churches, wow, about this church in Philadelphia, He would say, you guys, you may be small and you may be weak, but you're my kind of church. Whereas when we get to Pergamum or Thyatira and we look at some of these harsh words of condemnation and how smug they probably felt compared to Philadelphia, and yet how God actually viewed them. So it's words of warning as well as words of wisdom from God to remind us that we may not be well known, or we may be small, but if we're faithful, that's the kind of church God desires. So I think our job is to be more like Philadelphia, a faithful church in difficult times with temptations all around us, but not denying His name and staying true to His word. And so if we do that, what a great day to see the enemies of God bow before Him, and to see our own faithfulness vindicated as we honor and glorify God here on this earth. And so I think it's a great privilege for us to just remind ourselves that God's looking for faithfulness. And so that's what I have as my desire for my own life. In the midst of all my own weaknesses and struggles and sinfulness and just stupidity and lack of wisdom that occurs in my own life, I'm striving for faithfulness. And I pray that all of us may be doing the same thing, that we strive to be a faithful church. God bless you.